Good evening and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching the special edition at 8 on WION, the only channel that brings you a global perspective. On tonight's show, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer is getting a promotion, or so it appears. The toast of Twitterati for his gaffe, Spicer will now be seen less in front of the podium. That story is, of course, later on the show. But first, the man has spoken and the social media can't seem to get enough of it. Jared Kushner, aka Ivanka Trump's husband, made his first public speech addressing the CEOs in the Silicon Valley in the US. Now, Jared Kushner is known for many things: as Ivanka Trump's husband, as US President Donald Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor. Now, even as a lifelong Democrat who had a change of heart circa 2015, but as of Monday, he is set Twitter ablaze for a whole other reason. Now, his voice, believe it or not, this was the first time that Kushner made a public address since assuming his role at the White House.
Many of our federal systems are decades old, with our 10 oldest being between 39 and 56 years old. The Department of Defense, for example, still uses 8-inch floppy disks on some of its legacy systems.
Now, Kushner has a wide-ranging portfolio that includes working on a peace deal between Israel and Palestine. He also reportedly played a key role in the $100 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia. But in terms of public speaking, he hasn't done much at all.
Just a couple of things that you could certainly...
Twitter exploded on cue with comments ranging from describing his speech as breaking news to others calling it rare footage. All right, joining me on this story is Glenn Carl, writer and former intelligence officer. And if I can quickly go across to Glenn. Glenn, what do you make of this whole episode, as it were, coming in the wake of Jared Kushner's unprecedented, some would say, public address?
Well, a lot of this is the gossip level of interest. Here's a major figure who's been mysterious because he has been silent. And so we hear a young man with a youthful voice saying normal, bromide, pablum kind of things that he'll make everything right. So, okay. Now, he's a significant figure, given the, frankly, absurd portfolios that he's been given. But hearing his voice is a bit of fun for a moment.
All right, Glenn, stay on, if you will. I'm also joined by Joe Indries, a journalist who joins us from the U.S. Joe, good to have you on WION. What do you make of Jared Kushner's intervention, as it were? On the face of it, he seems to have got bad press, some would say.
Well, I think that, the pablum over, hearing Jared speak is sort of that Saturday Night Live level kind of interest, right? Like, we haven't heard him. It sounds very robotic. He looks very robotic. He's almost too pretty for a lot of people. And so, it is an American pastime to build someone up and then work to take them down. So I think that's a little bit of what you saw. I think what's very funny is, right, the people who are getting snarky on Twitter aren't old enough to know what a floppy disk is in many cases. And I think that the substance of what they're trying to do is worthwhile. It's something that needs to be done. It's something that, administrations have tried to do, going back to the Clinton years and then to the Bush years and then to the Obama years, trying to get electronic medical records, trying to, kind of squeeze down the verticals so that people can move their records with them electronically, and government agencies can have access to them quicker, which of course makes everybody's lives easier. There's nothing worse over here than going to the DMV and then being told, no, you need to go over to the tax collector because they have that one piece of paper that we need. And you're like, you guys are in the same building. You don't all have that in the cloud somewhere. And so what he's trying to do is actually practical. So the practicality of it all got a little bit lost in the sort of, madness over just hearing his voice.
Indeed. And Glenn, if I can come back to you, Glenn, we saw Jared Kushner address the CEOs in the Silicon Valley. Tomorrow, we are given to understand he can be expected to interact with his Israeli hosts to foster peace, as it were, or reconciliation between Israel and Palestine. Now, what do you make of this so-called transition from being the proverbial backroom boy to somebody who's in the forefront of shaping and reshaping American policy and diplomacy?
But it's hard not to make jokes about the attribution of portfolios and roles, frankly, in what passes for the White House now. One of the keys to the evolution and development of the human species is specialization. So if I'm a farmer and I have to make my own clothes, the clothes are not going to be as good as if someone can work out a machine that makes clothes for less money, better, and more quickly. Similarly, with portfolios and substance, expertise in the government, I spent my life in the government, there is something to be said for knowing intimately the bureaucracies, the challenges, the failures, the successes, and how to go about it. And if you are covering everything from Silicon Valley to floppy disks to peace in the Middle East, which has stymied the greatest minds and most earnest people whose lives were on the line and have been for 50 years, I find it frankly ridiculous and also a tragedy in the making. One other point on the 8-inch floppy disk business and how there are inefficiencies, my goodness, in the government. It's a little bit like the vicar who walks into a bar and discovers that there's drinking going on. This is something that's been happening, an effort for every government, Republican or Democrat, for decades and decades. Vice President Gore was in charge under President Clinton in the Reinventing Government Initiative, and he addressed or tried to exactly the same problems. You have some successes, new problems evolve as technology and time moves on. So there's nothing new under the sun here.
Indeed, and if I can come back to you, Joe. Joe, I mean, we know the social media, for one, does not seem to take him seriously. But in your personal estimation, given the transition he's seeking to make from being a backroom boy to playing a more dominant role insofar as shaping foreign policy is concerned, would you take him seriously as a top-level diplomat or special envoy? Also, can Trump and Kushner succeed where Obama failed, insofar as Israel-Palestine peace is concerned?
Well, I think that the history of Trump since he announced 2 years and a few days ago, it would suggest that we underestimate this team at our own peril, okay? So at the very least, Jared Kushner is in a role working, which is rare for this White House, to be quite honest with you. There aren't a lot of people in roles. So I think you have to take him seriously because at the very least, he has the president's ear and he's in a position where he's working. So you have to take at least his title seriously. Now, whether or not you think that he has the mental capacity to do this, and I agree with Glenn, this portfolio that is, Herculean, to say the least, you've got to make that decision on your own. And I'm not going to judge the guy as smart or not. I've never met him and really haven't read much of what he has said or any of that. So I'm not going to judge him as smart or not. I do think, though, that, diplomacy takes time and expertise, as Glenn was saying. I completely agree with that. You have to know what didn't work in order to figure out what might work next. And the field is always shifting. And, to say to your son-in-law, go fix the Middle East, right? Right? Gee, thanks, Dad. How do you want me to do that? Where do I start? So yes, to answer your question, I do think we have to take him seriously because he does have a White House calling card, right? And he is, you would think, speaking for the president when he takes these meetings. So I do think you have to take him seriously. As to whether or not we can have any sort of expectation that he will succeed, right? I think that bar is extremely low. I would imagine that if you went out to the boys in the desert and you went to the Bellagio and you put money on, you put $10 on, will Jared Kushner solve Middle East peace? And he did, you'd be a zillionaire by the end of the day. Those odds are very long.
Right, Glenn, so Joe says people tend to underestimate Jared Kushner. Would you also subscribe to this view that he has taken on an impossible task?
Oh, I think the portfolios, any one of them is a lifetime of work for the greatest statesman living. And when you take a half dozen of the greatest issues confronting the United States and the globe and put them on the desk of one man, you've made almost. It is the substance of satire and farce. Now, I think he's intelligent. I'll grant him that, and he may be very competent, talented, diligent, applied, and visionary. All of those things may be true. It's possible you can define success in such a way that whatever happens, you claim to have a success. Certainly, Trump's actions in the Middle East have been consequential. We have ratcheted up, whether intentionally or not. I believe it's quite clearly not intentionally. The tensions with Russia, the risk of a conflict is greater. We have sided clearly with Saudi Arabia while denouncing Iran. You can claim, as Trump has, that these are successes. You can also argue quite powerfully that they are catastrophes in the making and very foolish, since we denounced Qatar, also, Trump did, as a sponsor of terror and almost incited an invasion of it, while we have 2 military bases there that are critical to American actions in the Middle East, which apparently Trump did not know. So he's consequential. Kushner is consequential. And you can define success as you wish. So I'm sure we will hear claims of great success from the White House. There will be momentous actions taken, I have no doubt. I anticipate that the likelihood they create more chaos and problems is very, very high.
Right, and very quickly, Glenn and Joe, would you reckon that Kushner can be or is a perfect counterfoil to the more flamboyant Donald Trump? Kushner is less flamboyant. He keeps his own counsel and he speaks seldom. So would you describe him as a perfect foil for someone like Donald Trump? Glenn, to you first.
Well, whether a perfect foil, I don't know, but it is, at least in the context of the Trump presidency, a positive sign that there is a man there, however young and green he is, who is a rational actor and not someone with a mass of psychological issues that lead him to lash out at virtually everything and to understand and think about virtually nothing. So Kushner, in that sense, having a rational person is something that we can be pleased about.
And you, Joe?
Yeah, I think perfect foil. I don't know that you're going to find that. You're certainly not going to, if it's a teeter-totter, right? If it's a teeter-totter, it's hard to balance out the Trump personality, and you're certainly not going to want to get into the psychological, diagnosis of the president. It's certainly hard to balance out. So a perfect foil, I don't know that there is one. You would need a series of them, and I think that's what many people hoped you would see with Rex Tillerson and General Mattis and so on and so forth, that those, if you put all those guys on the other end of the teeter-totter, that you might get some balance. But it seems as if, depending on the day of the week and what's going on, one of those guys is on the teeter-totter or not, that he's not listening to. And let's remember here, the only reason that Jared Kushner has any sort of voice here is because of who he's married to. And so I really think that if we want to ascribe any power to the perfect foil to Donald Trump, I think you've got to look at Ivanka Trump and wonder and ask yourself, where is she in all of this? Because that seems to be the one person, right, who can actually create some weight to balance that scale out.
All right, Joe and Glenn, stay on.